Gute Woche. The Rebbe Zolgesund began the Farbrengen this afternoon that today, Shabbos, we are benching the month of Tammuz. And as it is, the system, whenever we bench a new incoming month, it is always done in the past month. Though on one hand, this is how the arrangement was made, that whenever we bless the new month, it is the last Shabbos of the outgoing month. So on one hand, one may say that there is really no shaykhs, there is no relation between these 2 months. The fact that we are benching the new month while we are still in the old month is no reason, obviously, to say that there is some sort of a relation, some sort of a contact between these 2 months. However, being that we're talking here al pi Torah, and any inyan which is al pi Torah, we cannot say that it is so coincidental and stamazoi, and that there is really no in-depth contact between these 2 months. So the truth is, though on one hand this is a technicality, and this is how it was set up, that we always have to bench the new and oncoming month while we are still in the old month, but on the other hand, there is still, we must say that there is a shaykhus between these 2 months. Now we are at the end of the month of Sivan. The month of Sivan is very famous. What we refer to it as the month of Sivan, or we refer to it as, it's referred to in Gemara, the 3rd month, counting from Nisan. And the Gemara puts a great attention on the fact that this is the 3rd month. The Gemara ties it in tremendous inyanim regarding number 3. It's Yarchot Lisa, it is the 3rd month, and that is when the Torah was given, and the Torah is also something which is composed of 3, Torah, Nevi'im, Miksuvin. It was given La'amot Lisoi, to a nation who is composed of 3, Kohanim, Leviim, Yisraelim. We see how the Gemara stresses greatly the idea of Shloisha. So we must say that this is what this month really stands for. It brings out the great and tremendous mile of Shloisha. Chayra, on one hand, when we're talking about Torah, Torah is the greatest thing which ever existed. Torah we refer to as, see the stresses at length, Shashua HaMelech Ba'atzmusai. This is the toy kaviyochel of the Rabbeinu Shalom. So when we're talking about Torah at such a high level, what difference is it when a Torah relates to number 3, a Torah would relate to another number? Torah obviously stands in a much, much higher level than numbers altogether. Torah is Be'ein Aroich, higher. Torah is Shashua HaMelech of the Rabbeinu Shalom. And here we say that what is the mile of Torah? That Torah was given in the 3rd month. Torah is composed of 3 parts, given to a nation that's composed of 3. And if we look into the Gemara and Masechta Shabbos and the Mefarshim, they keep on tying in more and more inyanim that have a shaykhus to the number of 3. So the Rebbe Zolgesund explained, basically, there is the level of Torah. How Torah stands in its highest level, as Shashua HaMelech Ba'atzmusai. However, there is the concept of Torah, Torah nitna la'asei shalom ba'olam. The whole idea of Dira B'Tachtonim, the whole goal why HaKadosh Baruch has given us Torah, is that Torah should bring peace into the world. What is the pshat when one brings shalom? Shalom can be created, we have to come on to shalom when there are 3 parties involved. If we have 2 people in an argument, and we want to make shalom between them, then the 3rd one steps in and he makes shalom. So this is what the whole inyan, when we tie Torah into the Maila of Shloisha, of number 3, this is how Torah is reflected in its ultimate goal. Why the HaKadosh Baruch Hu gave Torah into this world? Because HaKadosh Baruch Hu wanted Allah to shalom b'olam. Because this is the whole idea of Torah, to bring shalom into olam. And this is really what this number 3 stands for, and this is the message what the month of Sivan brings. From Sivan, we go into Tammuz. Tammuz is known as the 4th month. If Sivan is the 3rd, Tammuz is the 4th. What really happened in Tammuz? Besides the shivas that Tammuz has to us, for the fact that in Tammuz we celebrate Yud Beis Tammuz, However, in Tammuz is also the inyan of Shiva Asa b'Tammuz, which is a fast. In other words, in Tammuz really unwanted things happened. And that is why, just like Chazal used the expression, HaKadosh Baruch Hu is makdim refuah lamaka. HaKadosh Baruch Hu sends us the cure before the plague. The same here. HaKadosh Baruch Hu has given us these tremendous koiches in the month of Sivan so that we should be able to survive and overcome and know how to handle the situation which we will have in the month of Tammuz. Because the ultimate idea of Tammuz is also to be mehapech, to take this chayshech, this darkness, this spiritual darkness which we have gotten in Tammuz, and ultimately to create that and change that over, make light and make lichtigkeit out of that as well. Where do we get the strength to fulfill this mission in the month of Tammuz? This we get from the month of Sivan. And Sivan has this extra koyach within it, because Sivan is the month of Matan Torah. Sivan gives us these inyanim of Lasei Shalom Ba'olam. What do we mean by Lasei Shalom Ba'olam? This is the whole concept of Dira B'Tachtonim. The whole idea why HaKadosh Baruch Hu has created the world and given Torah into this world and sent our neshamas down into this world. This is all the idea of Torah. Torah is the concept of number 3, of Lasei Shalom Ba'olam. And this, the Rebbe elaborated as well. That is why one cannot say he will just lock himself up and learn Torah for himself and will not go out and share Torah with others and not go out and be involved with educating others to Torah. This is not the idea of Torah. The whole idea of Torah is reflected in the month when Torah was given, Tlisai, because this brings the whole message of Torah, that's the goal of a Yid, that his inyan is to Lasei Shalom Ba'olam, to keep on sharing Torah with others and bringing the message of Torah to others. And this is taka what we find in the month of Tammuz. Benegei the Frierdiker Rebbe's attitude, this was exactly what his attitude was. The Frierdiker Rebbe sacrificed his life, literally, Pikuach Nefesh. For what reason? To see to it that Yiddish kinder should be able to gain the knowledge of Yiddishkeit and learn the basis of Yiddishkeit, learn Aleph Beis, Chedarim, for the upkeep of Yiddishkeit, put his own life into danger, put the life of leading Hasidim into danger, all that because Yidden and children particularly should be able to gain the basic knowledge of Inyanim and Torah. Simple Inyanim, obviously. And here we see how a big person, a giant person, a man of Yisrael, put his life into danger so that little children and people as well, Yidden and under those circumstances, should be able to learn Torah and acquaint themselves with Torah and be able to fulfill mitzvah. This is Benegei D'Shayches between the month of Sivan and the month of Tammuz in all years. Regardless the Kviyos, what day of the month we bench Sivan, and regardless what parsha in the week we read on the Shabbos that we bench the month of Tammuz. This year, as the Kviyas is this year, Shabbos Mevorchim Sivan falls out on 23... Shabbos Mevorchim Tammuz, falls out on 23 days in the month of Sivan. If we want to find any special inyan, Benegei 23 days in the month of Sivan, Rebbe says we do not have to search too far. It's a pasuk. And it is a pasuk in Megillas Esther. In Megillas Esther, where the Megillah tells us exactly when Achashverosh was convinced to help the Yidden, the message which Achashverosh sent out to all the 127 countries which he ruled was sent out on 23 days in the month of Sivan. B'chodesh Sivan, be'esrim v'shalosh boi, that is when the Hashtronim, Bnei Aramachim, all the messengers left Achashverosh, and as the pasuk tells us, Yotzu muvholim utchufim. They went in a tremendous rush, with a tremendous enthusiasm, to bring this message across all the countries of Achashverosh. Memele, Rebbe says, the continuation of the psukim, where the pasuk tells us how Mordechai yotza milafnei HaMelech, Bilvush Malchus, Tchelas V'chur, all the honor and covet which was given to Mordechai, how Mordechai was wearing the royal clothes, and this is how Mordechai walked into the street. Obviously, the world is under the impression that when did all this take place? This took place on Purim. But really, if we look into the sequence of the psukim, it did not take place on Purim. It may have happened again on Purim. But when did it really happen? For the first time, it happened on this day of 23 days in the month of Sivan. Rabbi says it's hard to learn pshat that Achashverosh came out with this proclamation and message on 23 days in Sivan. And the Megillah tells us that the message was brought in a format of Muvholim Etchufim. It was carried in a tremendous rush. And when did Mordechai, Yotza Melefnei HaMelech, Belvush Malchus, Tcheles V'chol, this waited till Purim. They waited such a long period from Sivan till Purim. In Pshuta Shel Mikra, as we look through the Psukim in the Megillah, it is not glottic to say that this is how it happened. Memela, this day of 23 days in the month of Sivan, what is the specialty of this day to us now? To us, this is a day that reminds us that all inyanim of Yiddishkeit have to be done in a way of muvholim etchufim. We have to get involved with a tremendous enthusiasm, with a tremendous rush, not to postpone inyanim for tomorrow, and fulfill all inyanim of Yiddishkeit and get lachkeit as soon as possible. And here the Rebbe referred to all of the miftzayim, and named each one of them, each one of all of the 10 miftzayim, as well as Mitzvah Sefer Torah, seeing to it that every Yid has an ois in Sefer Torah. Our attitude to all of these inyanim has to be like this day expresses, Muvholim Etchufim. So on one hand, this is what we are demanding from a Yid. Here comes a Yid and says that he heard of a Korach. And what was Korach's attitude? Korach's attitude was, he argued on the Kohana G'dayla. He argued on Moshe Rabbeinu. Korach congregated 250 people around him, and they all claimed, what was Korach's taina? Korach approached Moshe Rabbeinu and he said, Kol ha'ida kulam kadoshim, everyone is holy. Umadua tisnasu al kal Hashem. And therefore, what Korach really argued was, why is there an arrangement of a Kohen Gadol and so forth? Everybody is equal. This is what Korach said. At the same time, while Korach was trying to bring across this message, and obviously he was demonstrating for modesty, for anivis, this is what he was speaking out for, what did Korach at the same time say? That he wants to be the Kohen Gadol. Such a tremendous contradiction in his own words. Here he's claiming, Kolei de Kulam Kedoshim, Uvaseicham Hashem, Umaduat Isnasu. And this is the message that Korach is carrying, and he's bringing with him 250 people, 250, as the Rebbe referred to them, 250 Rosh Yeshivas, who are agreeing to Korach's message, and at the same time, let us see how contradictory it is. Korach himself is saying that there shouldn't be an inyan of a Kohen Gadol, everyone is equal, and at the same time he's saying he is the one that wants to be the Kohen Gadol. Not Aaron should be the Kohen Gadol, he is the one. So here, if we really look into the contents of Korach's argument, we see how contradictory he is, and how he's trying to cover up what he really wants. He's putting it into an itztal, into a format that he's speaking up for modesty, but at the same time, what does he really want? He's the one that wants to be the Kohen Gadol. And therefore, it says, when it comes to Kiruv Rechoikim, when it comes to be Mekarev, Yidden, who, in the meantime, as yet, are not close to Yiddishkeit, here there is a Korach that speaks up. There's a Korach that says, all Jews are equal, so why get involved and be Mekar of this person? Let him stay as he is. Is he familiar with Yiddishkeit? Fine. If he's not familiar with Yiddishkeit, just leave him. Whose argument is this? This is a Korach type of an argument. He's a Yid. Why are you getting involved in making differences between one Yid and another? You see, as long as he's a Yid, leave him. But to get involved and to try and uplift him, spiritual uplifting and bringing him closer to Yiddishkeit, this is what Korach and his people are arguing. They do not see any point in it. But whose taina is this? This is a taina of a Korach. And this is totally contradictory to what Torah demands from us. The Rebbe explained Al Pi Chassidus and Al Pi Kabbalah. Chassidus, it's explained that the letter Hey, which really has like three sides, two sides that are combined, and the third side of the letter Hey is not attached in any way, but this is a line which stands on itself. Chassidus explains that these three kavim of a Hey reflect machshove, dibur, and maise. This Chassidus explains it at length. What do we find by Korach? Korach is composed of 3 letters. First letter of Korach is a kuf. A kuf actually also has the same 3 sides which a hey has. However, the leg of the kuf goes down much longer, goes outside of a regular line. It goes down longer than the line. This is in one way Korach. In other words, Korach possessed machshava dibur. However, the maise is supposed to be reflected in accordance to the machshava and dibur. By Korach it went out of line. In other words, not as it should be. Then we have the reish. The reish is only composed of 2 sides. In other words, machshava and dibur without maise. It's also wrong. Then we have the ches, which has the 3 sides. However, what is the difference between a hey and a ches? In a hey there's a space. In a ches there's no space. When an inyan is transmitted through machshava, dibur, and maiseh, before it comes into maiseh, it requires a pause. In other words, for example, the Rebbe brought an example. If somebody goes to paskin a halacha, a rav, a dayan who paskins a shayla. So it goes through also all the 3 stages, machshava, dibur, and then it goes through the stage of maiseh. However, before he brings out his psak into maiseh, before he relates his psak, this is how it should really be enacted, it requires a tremendous amount of yishuv hadas. He has to really think back and make sure he's doing it this behis yashfos, he's not doing it in a rush, he's doing it properly as it should be, and that the psak that he's coming out with is really the right psak. So actually, before an inyan is brought down into Maisa, there is a need for a pause to make sure that this is the right inyan, and this is how it should be brought into Maisa. A ches does not allow for this pause. A ches has all the three lines, but all the 3 lines are combined. So again, it shows us the avodah by Korach was not as it should be. The avodah as it should be is machshava and dibur, and room for a pause, and then maiseh, and maiseh as Torah requires maiseh, not more than it should be. And neither of this was what Korach possessed. As the custom in recent Farbrengens, the Rebbe soll gesund sein, dedicates a sicha to the learning of the Rambam. The Rebbe today, this afternoon, also spoke in Inyan benegay the Shir and Rambam, today's Shir and Rambam, and in general again stressed the importance of learning Rambam, which is a sefer of halachas. This is the whole idea of the Rambam. The Rambam wrote his sefer. The Rambam himself writes in the Hakdameh that this is a sefer of halachas, and it is written kakoto in kagodel. Everyone can learn the sefer. The only thing is, one who is a godel naturally can dwell deeper into the Rambam. One who is not as yet a godel will learn it at a more simple level. But this is a sefer which is open for everyone. Here the Rebbe said there are definitely some that are commenting, how can we demand from people to learn 3 prakim of Rambam in one day? At a time, if we look into the Rambam, we see that not only on a perek, on a halacha of the Rambam, how much mefarshim dwelled and wrote tile, mountains upon mountains was put into, an effort was put into each and every single halacha of the Rambam. And here we are requiring from people to learn Rambam in a way of learning in a system of 3 prakim a day, so that we will be able to finish for the birthday of the Rambam, which is Erev Pesach, by next year Erev Pesach. The Rebbe said, true, on one hand, but on the other hand, this is the whole idea of learning Rambam, is not to learn it in a slow way. In other words, not for us to get involved in pulpulim and so forth. Our goal here is one should become familiarized with halachas. This is the whole union of learning halachas. And here the Rebbe got involved into the great plus of learning Torah in a format of bekiyus. It's a tremendous inyan for Yidden to be familiar in all inyanim and Torah. I've only suggested, even if we're learning 3 prakim of Rambam, and actually when we learn 3 prakim of Rambam, we cannot learn it in a way of proper iyun, because we're going to cover 3 prakim in one day. At least one halacha out of the 3 Prakim and Rambam, we should learn with going a little deeper, paying a little more attention and getting involved a little more in detail into this one halacha. However, in general, it is understood that when we are learning 3 Prakim a day, we are not getting involved into the Yukim and Pratim and so forth. Our prime goal is to familiarize ourselves with all the mitzvahs in detail. And the Rebbe spoke tremendously praising that the proper way of learning, in praise of the proper way of learning Torah, is for one to learn in a way of bikiyus. Rebbe said he once came across a pilpul written by somebody who was a Yerushalayim and was well learned and wrote a beautiful pilpul. However, the outcome of the pilpul was that it was contradictory to a Beferish Mishnah. How can this be? Because if one learns, I refer to those yeshivas where they cover in the Zman, the period of 6 months, they cover 3, 4, 5, or even 10 Blat Gemara. So, what do we get out of this? When the Talmud grows up, and if he learns 10 Blat Gemara in a term, in the Zman, how much Gemara can he cover? So true, on one hand, the Gemara that he's learning is learning very, very much in depth and very much be'iyun. However, at the same time, it is our goal to see to it that Talmidim will not always have their Rashi Yeshivas with them. The Talmud has to go out ultimately on his own. So when the Talmud goes out on his own, we have to see to it that he has a good, balanced Yediyah in all inyanim of Torah. The Rebbe says, when the Talmud is saying a pilpul in presence of his Rosh Yeshiva, and he will say it then, and it will be contradictory to a Mishnah, then definitely the Rosh Yeshiva is familiar and versed to criticize him and point it and bring it to his attention. However, when he's out on his own, and at the same time the Talmud cannot be blamed. He does not know of the Mishnah, he never learned this Mishnah, and that is why he can come up with a svara which will be contradictory to an open Mishnah. Therefore, the Derech HaLimud, where all that's learned with Yeshiva Bacharim is either the 3 Bavis, Bava Kama, Bava Metziyim, Bava Basra, or even selected 7 Mesechtas of Shas, this is not sufficient. The ultimate goal of every Yid is he should be well familiar in all inyanim of Torah. And this is what we are gaining by learning the Rambam. And it is so obvious that this is the Rambam's goal, that Yidden should be familiar in halachas. We can see this from the arrangement, how the Rambam arranged his halachas. In the Rambam, we have the halachas of chametz matzah. After chametz matzah, this is the seder of zmanim in the Rambam. After chametz matzah, the Rambam gives us hilchas sheifa. After sheifa, the Rambam gives us hilchas sukkah and lulav. Obviously, the Rambam should go in a system, as he himself says, zmanim. He goes in a sequence of zman, of the calendar, as these Yomim Tovim are taking place. Why is it that Hilchas Shvisas Asa, which deals with the dinim of Yom Kippur, which, according to our understanding, would belong right after Hilchas Sheifa? After Hilchas Sheifa, that is when, before Hilchas Sukkah, that is when the Rambam should have inserted the halachas of Yom Kippur, and the Rambam didn't. Where did the Rambam put the halachas of Yom Kippur? Right after Hilchas Shabbos. Why is this? If we look into Hilchas Yom Kippur, we will see that at the beginning, the Rambam points out several halachas. Ein bein Shabbos liyom Kippurim. Differences between Shabbos and Yom Kippur. There's one difference between Shabbos and Yom Kippur, another difference between Shabbos and Yom Kippur. Being that the Rambam's goal is to teach us halachas, so the Rambam here had to look away at the fact that Hilchas Yom Kippur really belongs between Hilchas Sheifa and Hilchas Sukkah. Being that the Rambam wanted to point out in Yonim that are different between Shabbos and Yom Kippur, that is why the Rambam found it much more appropriate to put the halachas of Yom Kippur right after Shabbos, so that we should be able to see the difference, as the Rambam himself says, ain't being Shabbos to Yom Kippurim, but this and so forth. That's in Memela, the Rambam already told us all the dinim of Hilchas Shvisas Asa, all the dinim of Yom Kippur. Then further in Zmanim, the Rambam brings Chametz Matzah. After Chametz Matzah, we come to Sheifa. Yom Kippur we already learned right after Shabbos, and then we go on to Sukkot and Lulav. So again we see how everything in the Rambam is extremely accurate, and it's all with the same goal, with the same intention, in order to be able to learn and familiarize ourselves with halachas as it should be. Here the Rebbe came to an inyan, a diuk, in today's shiur in the Rambam. And this also leads us, as the Rebbe says, to interpretation of the Geschmacke inyan in the Alter Rebbe Shulchan Aruch. At the end of Hilchos Chametz Matzah, when the Rambam is about finished describing all the details of the Seder, and the Rambam tells us exactly how we are to drink the 4 kaises. Rambam says, Yesh loy limzoig kais chamishi. There are those that also pour in a 5th kais. By each and every one of the 4th kaises, of the 4 kaises until now, the Rambam told us exactly that he makes a bracha on it, when he drinks it. The Rambam here talks about the 5th kais, it should be poured in, and the Rambam does not make any mention of drinking the kais. Rabbi says, to say that there is a manuscript of the Rambam, where it was taka written the words, and for whatever technical reason these words were omitted, it's very hard to say so. It was just Rabbi used the expression to suck this out of our fingers. Such type of an approach is very hard to say, because that would have been found in some sort of a print, or some sort of an old manuscript of the Rambam. If it would have been there, it definitely would have appeared until now. Therefore, the Rebbe says, the Rechefsha, he feels that the Rambam here is telling us, the Rambam Taka holds that you pour in a 5th kais. However, the Rambam holds that this kais was never drinked. It was only poured in and not to be drinked. The Rambam says there's a machlokes of Paiskim, of Rishonim. There are some that are in the opinion of drinking 5 kaises. However, there are some that claim only 4. The Rambam claims we take it to drink 4 kaises, but we do pour in a 5th kais which is not drinked. Here the Rebbe referred to Harav Kasher, who wrote a special kuntaras explaining all the details of the machlokes HaPaiskim regarding this 5th kais. And this is how it seems would be the shit of the Rambam. Now let us look into the Alter Rebbe Shulchan Aruch. In the Alter Rebbe Shulchan Aruch in Simen Tov Pei and in Tov Pei Aleph, we find the Alter Rebbe talking about the 4 kaises. Then the Alter Rebbe uses this expression. It is a custom in these countries, limzoig kais echad yoiser ma'mesubin, to pour in another kais, another becha, more than the people who are participating in this Seder. This is how we refer to this kais. This kais is named kais of Eliyahu Novi. If we look later in Siman Tov Pei Aleph, which is the following siman to this, here the Alter Rebbe tells us that we're not allowed to drink or eat anything after the Seder. However, one who is an istanis, or he doesn't feel well, yesh lahatir loy, it can be permitted to permit him lishtois kais chamishi, to drink the 5th kais. Here Alter Rebbe uses the expression kais chamishi, there's a 5th kais. In other words, for a person who isn't feeling well, and we're looking for a heta, for him to be able to drink something after we finish the Seder. So we suggest to him that he should hold on to the opinion of those Paiskim that claim that we should drink 5 kaises. So Mamela, he will be able to get another drink. When the Alter Rebbe tells us about pouring in the kais shel Eliyahu Novi, the Alter Rebbe uses a strange expression. Kais echad yoiser ma mesubin. One more kais than the people that are present. There are some svarim that want to tie together the kais of Eliyahu Navi with the fifth kais. And I want to say it's the same idea. And they explain, being that we don't know how to feel sich, this is something which is in doubt. So that is why we pour in a fifth kais and we do not drink it. And this is symbolic to Eliyahu Navi, that when Eliyahu Navi will come, he will teach us what we should do, how we should go about it. Should we drink 4 kaises or should we drink 5 kaises? If the kais of Eliyahu Navi is because of we are in doubt whether we drink 4 kaises or 5 kaises, here the Rebbe is asking, then why when it comes to pour the kais of Eliyahu Navi, we only pour 1 kais? Just like every participant in the Seder has for himself each one of the kaises, it comes to the 5th kais, which we taka do not drink. Let us pour this kais also. Let it everybody put down next to himself an extra becher. And this is not how Yidden feels it. And this is not what the Shulchan Aruch tells us. The Alter Rebbe is very accurate. The Alter Rebbe tells us, kais echad, yesam ha-mesubin. As many people are participating in this Seder, we pour on 1 more kais. Why? This is a separate kais. This has nothing to do with the question of 4 kaises or 5 kaises. Why? Because we are expecting right now an additional participant in the Seder. Who is that? Eliyahu Navi. That is why the Alter Rebbe does not refer to this as the 5th kais. This has nothing to do with the 5th kais. This is a kais echad yesam ha-mesubin. 1 kais more than the people that are present. There are X amount of people present at the Seder. So we add on 1 more kais because to this part of the Seder there will be another participant. Who is this other participant? Eliyahu Navi. And that is why it's the minig Yisrael that we go and open the door. Because Eliyahu Navi is really participating in every Seder. And we open the door, the Rebbe says, so that Eliyahu Navi shouldn't have to knock and wait till we let him in. He should be able to come in and participate in our Seder. That is why we run and open the door to welcome Eliyahu Navi to come into our Seder. Where do we find such an inyan al pi halacha, that there's an inyan of a kos poured in and we do not drink the kos? We find it in one other place in Shas. And that is B'negeya, if Yontif falls out on a Friday, and people are in the middle of a Sudas Yontif, late Friday, and it's coming into Shabbos, and they're benching, and being that it's into Shabbos, they are not allowed to eat or drink anymore, because they have to make Kiddush for Shabbos. And benching on a kos is a tremendous inyan, as we find in Chazal and in Shulchan Aruch. So here we also have a similar case where they bench on a kais because they finished they're concluding their yontif meal. However, this kos cannot be drank at the time because it is already Shabbos. So a be'er priagofen cannot be made, and they cannot drink the kos, and the kos just has to be put away. So here is another place where we find the inyan of preparing a kais and not drinking the kais. Rebbe also added that the Frierdiker Rebbe related that usually we know that when do we prepare this kais for Eliyahu Navi? The kais for Eliyahu Navi is prepared once we've already poured in our 4th kais. Once we have poured in our 4th kais, that is when we pour in the kais for Eliyahu Navi. So the Frierdiker Rebbe related that the custom by the Rabbeim was at many times to prepare this kais even before Birchas HaMazon. In other words, when we are still preparing our 3rd kais, they would prepare the kais for Eliyahu Navi. Sometimes before Birchas HaMazon, and sometimes when we prepare the 4th kais. And this, the Rebbe says, goes along with what is explained in Sfarim, that really the Seder is divided into 2 parts. The first half of the Seder has a shaykhus to Yitzias Mitzrayim, and the second half of the Seder has a shaykhus to the Gula HaSida, to the coming of Mashiach. And that is why even the Birchas HaMazon, which is a Birchas HaMazon on the Suda which we ate in the first half of the Seder, however, that being that in Birchas HaMazon we stress, we stress for Geula in Birchas HaMazon, So that is why there is room to say that the preparation of Kaisei Shalalayo could come at times also before we have prepared the third Kais, because this third Kais comes from Birchas HaMazon, and Birchas HaMazon also has a shaykhs to the union of Gula. Benegeya the Mishnah in Pirkei Avos, in today's Perik, it is Perik Shlishi, the third Perik. When the Rebbe stressed the greatness of Yachat Lisoi, the third month, the Rebbe immediately mentioned that today's Perik is Perik Lisoi, it is the third Perik. Pirkei Avos, we know, is Mila de Chasidusa. In Yonim, which are Lifnim Mishuras Hadin. In Yonim, which al Pi Halacha, we are not as obligated to do them. However, Pirkei Avos introduces us into Mila de Chasidusa, things of Chasidisha acts. Let us look into Mishnah Beis. Mishnah Beis begins with Rab Chanina Sgan HaKoyenim Moimer. What does Rab Chanina Sgan HaKoyenim tell us? Have a mispalel b'shloim shel malchus. Pray for the welfare of the government. Shel molei mero, for were it not for the fear of it. Ishes reyehu chayim beloi. Men would swallow one another alive. One in you. Then we come to, in the same Mishnah, Rab Chanina ben Tradinoima, a quotation from another Tana. What does he tell us? Shnayim sheyoshvim vein b'neihem divrei Torah, if two people sit together and they are not learning Torah, there's no exchange of words of Torah between them. Hareza moishav leitzim. It's a moishav leitzim. However, shnayim sheyoshvim v'yesh b'neihem divrei Torah, shchina shchuya b'neihem, then the shchina dwells amongst them. But says the division of Mishnahs is extremely accurate, and as mentioned, that there's a halacha. If one says he's mekadesh as a isha, he's mekadesh a wife, al menas, that he is well versed in Mishnah. So there's a shaila in Paiskim, how many Mishnahs does he have to know? So we see that the number of Mishnahs plays a role even in la halacha to such an extent. Mishnah Beis, quotations of two separate Tanoim, obviously two separate inyanim, one telling us how we are supposed to pray for the welfare of the government, another one telling us the importance of two people, or one person, anyone learning Torah. These two inyanim were blended into one Mishnah. What shaykhus is there between these two inyanim that there should be one Mishnah? Furthermore, what is Pirkei Avos, as just mentioned, is to teach us Mila de Chasidusa. What is the Mila de Chasidusa? That when two people get together, they are to learn Torah. When one person is himself, he should learn Torah. It's a pasuk. What does Rashi comment? You are meilim b'Torah, that you didn't have to learn Torah. It is no Mila de Chasidusa if a person learns Torah. This is our obligation, midaraisa. Each and every yid is mechuyev to learn Torah every spare minute that he has. Comes Rab Chanina ben Tradion, who tells us, introduces us to think that when two people sit together, they don't learn Torah, there's no exchange of Torah, it is a moishav leitzim. And if one sits and learns Torah, two or even one, HaKadosh Baruch Hu gives him schar. And we cannot say that the Pirkei Avos is a Mila de Chasidusa, is telling us the Mila de Chasidusa, the greatness of the Rabbeinu Shalom, that the Rabbeinu Shalom is rewarding the one or two people who are learning Torah. The Pirkei Avos is talking about our share, what we have to do, what Yidden have to do, what people have to do. So what Pirkei Avos introduces a new inyan that Yidden have to learn Torah. Something which in B'chukai Setalechu, very famous and basic inyan. So Rebbe Zilgazin explains definitely the inyan of Limud HaTorah is something which we are obligated to, Min HaTorah, no question about it. However, what the Mishnah here is stressing, Shnayim sheyoshvim v'yesh b'neihem divrei Torah. Echad sheyoshev v'oisik b'Torah. There are various levels of learning Torah. Chassidus stresses a lot. What is the inyan of Eisik b'Torah? What is the expression Eisik b'Torah? Not loy b'Torah, Eisik b'Torah. Eisik b'Torah means when a person looks at Torah just as one looks at a business. A person who has his own business, there's just no limit to it. He's constantly involved and constantly he's looking for ideas. How can he improve his business? How could he expand his business? How could he be more successful? How much more different is it of a worker? A worker finished his day, he leaves his job, and then until the next morning he's free, basically. In other words, Torah could be learned at various attitudes. When Yidden take an attitude of Yoshev ve'oisik b'Torah, and the same the Rebbe stressed, the word Yoshev. Yoshev means in a hisyashvus. He's really putting himself into it. Not stam learning Torah. Putting himself into Torah to the fullest extent. And at every opportunity he has, two people get together. What is their exchange? Their exchange is in Torah. And in what way? Not stam just talking. The expression would go min hasafa l'chutz, just from the outside. This is what their heads are really into. Echad sheyoshev ve'isik b'Torah, shnayim oiskim b'Torah. And this is something which is lefnim mishuras hadin. And this is why the Mishnah tells us a special reward would be given to these people. What is the introduction to this part of the Mishnah? Have a mispal b'shloim mishal malchus. We should pray for the welfare of malchus. Why? Because this also gives us a plus in learning Torah. It is self-understood that when a Yid is in Gashmias, in better circumstances, then he can better put himself into learning Torah. When a Yid is in Gashmias, Rahman al-Islam, in a position of fear, or in a very not convenient position, then his Torah learning, his mind cannot be fully into Torah. That is why Rabbi Chanina's Ganakainim tells us, you should know, have a mispal b'shloim mishal malchus. If you will be sure that the government around you is taking care of you, and there's no such thing as ishes re'eu chayim baloi, people are not swallowing each other alive, lebedike. In other words, this gashmiistic circumstances will be comfortable ones. That is when you will be able to succeed in dedicating yourself to Torah. So that is why being mispal b'shloim mishal malchus comes as an introduction to one dedicating himself fully to Torah. Here the Rebbe quoted the Rambam. Rambam says that when Mashiach will come, it will be madanim ka'ofa. We will have delicacies. It's such a multiplication, just like we have dust today. Actually, we're talking about the days of Mashiach. Why is there a need for such good gashmias? But when Yidden will have a comfortable setup in Gashmias, this will automatically help that Yidden will be able to dedicate himself fully to the learning of Torah. So the same thing here. When Shloima Shel Malchus, when there's the government taking care of us, and seeing that we have all our needs, and watching us, and guarding us, that is when we can fulfill the latter part of the Mishnah of being a Yoshev V'Yosek B'Torah. And interesting, the Rebbe says, who are the people that are saying these Mishnahs? The first half of the Mishnah is said by Rab Chanina's Gan HaKohenim. The second half of the Mishnah is said by Rab Chanina ben Tradian. Rab Chanina ben Tradian, we know, was one of the Asara Harugei Malchus, one of the 10 Tanoim which were killed by the Romans. And that's them killed, tortured in the most terrible way, something which in Jewish history we constantly keep on referring to. And there is an opinion that Rab Chanina's Gan HaKohenim was also one of them. One of the Asara Harugei Malchus. So we can imagine, on one hand, what type of feeling these people had to Malchus. What type of feeling they had to the government. And at the same time, we find that they're the ones that are telling us, have a mispal b'shloim mishal Malchus. Why? Because they're not out for the Shloim Shel Malchus. The idea here is when it will be Shloim Shel Malchus properly, that is when it will be good for Yidden as well, that Yidden will be able to fulfill, to be a Shnaim Sheyeshev Ve'isik B'Torah, Echad Sheyeshev Ve'isik B'Torah. It will be simply much easier for Yidden to be able to learn Torah. Rabbi referred to an Indian which came out to mention, Rabbi mentioned it by the Yechides with the Orchim after Shavuos. And this is the Gemara. The Gemara tells us, Al yepoter oda mechaveiroi ela metoich dvar halacha. When one parts from another, should only part with a dvar halacha. In other words, how should two people, expression in Yiddish goes, gesegnen sich, say goodbye one to another, by one saying to another a dvar halacha. And Chazal conclude, shemetoich kach zeichreyu. By doing this, he will remember him. He will travel. He's traveling away. He's traveling hundreds of miles away. But he'll always be referring, this person told me an Indian Advar Allah. So the question arises, what do we mean by Dvar Halacha? In Torah there are various inyanim. There's a halacha, which means a simple quotation, a halacha. Quotation in halacha. Then there is shakla v'tarya in Torah, pilpula. So we know that when Yosef parted with his brothers, he told them, Al tirgezu badarech, don't get angry while you will be traveling. So Chazal comment, what did Yosef mean? That you should not talk and learning while you will be traveling. Because if you will talk and learning, you will get involved, and you will not, will distract you from where you have to travel. So the question arises, we have two contradictions. Here we are told, Al tirgezu badarech, that when we go on a road, we should not get involved in a conversation and learning, conversing one with another in Torah. Here Chazal tell us, Al yipoter oda mechaveiroi, ela metoich dvar halacha. How do these things agree? So it's explained that by dvar halacha we mean a halacha psuka. There's a difference whether two people are traveling and they are involved in a deep, in-depth pilpul and learning, and one saying different than the other. This distracts them so they wouldn't be able to see where they're traveling. However, a quotation of a halacha, no more and no less, this is something which he heard the halacha and he's finished, and he can definitely pay attention to what he has to while he's traveling. If we look into the Gemara, before the Gemara says, Al yipoter oda mechaveiroi ela metoich dvar halacha, there's another Gemara. What does the Gemara say there? That one should not begin davening ela mitoich halacha psuka. If one learned before davening. Also the same idea. If he was involved in a real shakla v'talya, in a real pilpul and learning, now he's going to daven, so his mind is probably still in Torah, because he was in a real conversation in Torah. So he wouldn't be able to have the proper kavanah while he's davening now. So that is why Chazal tell us if one learns before davening, he should learn a halacha psuka, an aga paskin to halacha. A halacha, just a quotation of a halacha, something which will not drag him into additional pilpulim and svaras and thoughts and so forth, so it wouldn't be contradictory to his davening, to his kavanah and tefillah. So we see that when Chazal were talking about davening, they added on the word halacha psuka. When Chazal are talking about a person who's traveling, al yipata oda mechaveiroi, Chazal did not add the word halacha psuka, just halacha. So that is why there are some commentaries, Talmidei Rabbeinu Yoina, they claim that when people part with one with another, they could get involved in a depth conversation of learning. We have a kasha from Yosef, so we have a kasha. Why did Yosef tell his brothers al tirgezu badarech? Because they claim there's an open fact. Because the Mishnah does not, the Chazal do not end on the word halacha psuka. So Zasimin, it could be a halacha which is not only a halacha psuka, halacha which requires thought and getting involved into pilpulim, shakla v'talya, and so forth. The Rebbe explained today there's a difference in what type of travel we're talking about. When Yosef's brothers were traveling, they were traveling in a dangerous trip, and they had to pay attention to where they were traveling. That is why Yosef cautioned them, Al tirgezu badarech, don't get involved in learning, because if you will get involved in discussions of learning, then who knows what's going to happen while you're traveling. You wouldn't watch where you have to travel, how you're traveling. The Rebbe says in today's day and age, when people are riding on a plane, or they're riding on a train, or even if they're riding in a car, there's one person who's driving the car and the rest of the people are not driving the car. They are not involved in the technicalities of the trip. They are just going along on the trip. Why should we say that all they could discuss is halacha psuka? They could definitely be involved in learning. And talking in Yonim, Shakla, Vitalia, and learning, there are people riding a plane. If people are riding a plane, are they paying attention to the details and technicalities, how the plane should be driven? This is something which there's a pilot, and that's his job, and that's what he's taking care of. The rest of the people are just sitting there to get to their destination. If they're sitting there to get to their destination, definitely Yidden can be learning in Yonim and Torah. One with another could be discussing Shakla, Vitalia of Torah. Here the Rebbe raised a tremendous question. It is a Gemara. Al yipoter oda mechaveiroi elo metoich dvar halacha. If one parts from another, they should talk and learning. If we look into the Rambam, we look into the Shulchan Aruch, we look into Beis Yosef, this Gemara is not quoted. Why? Rebbe gave two interpretations. First, the Rebbe said, let us look at the end of the Chazal. Chazal tell us, why take al yipoter oda mechaveiroi elo metoich dvar halacha? So Chazal say, Shemetoich kach zechreyu. That is how he will remember him. he'll always refer, this person told me something. What? So what if he will remember him? This will bring to a closeness between these two people. In other words, it is an inyan of Avas Yisrael. The whole idea of Al Yipoter Odom Mechaveiro Elo Metoich Dvar Halacha is another step in Avas Yisrael. So one Yid will remember the other, if he will remember him. So therefore, if one will ever come across to be able to assist the other, he will take an interest in assisting him and helping him and taking an interest in him. All this will bring about a closeness between these two people. So Mamela, there's no reason for Shulchan Aruch to quote this halacha. This is a part of Avas Yisrael. Just like the Rambam tells us, Avas Yisrael is a mitzvah min ha-Torah. Then the Rambam says the Chachamim have added various inyanim which come as a result of Avas Yisrael. The same with this. Al Yipoter Odom Mechaveiro Elo Metoich Dvar Halacha is also a result of Avas Yisrael. This brings about closeness between you. Then the Rebbe explained it differently. The Rebbe said, the Rambam tells us that there were many inyanim, gzeires, v'takonis, which the Chachamim made. All previous Chachamim, previous generations. However, if we look carefully, we will see that not everything was accepted and adopted by Klal Yisrael. Rebbe says, it is seen when people part one with another, the practice as we see it today, and obviously it was the same many years ago, was not that one should stand and one should relate an Indian and Torah to the other. What is the popular practice when people part one with another today? Either they bring gifts one to another, he should be able to take along for his family, the person who's traveling, or they bring him sandwiches, which he should have to eat while he's traveling. Or the Rebbe says, they simply hug each other and kiss each other and express goodbye. The Rebbe says, it is not seen the practice that when people leave one another, they should say an Inyan and Torah one to another. This practice is not seen today, and obviously this practice was not seen years ago either. Chazal Taka suggested it. The Chachamim said this would be the proper way. Al Yipoter Odom Mechaveiro Elo Metoich Dvar Halacha. However, it was not an adopted practice by Yidden. Yidden did not feel it this way. That is why in later years when the Shulchan Aruch was edited, it was not put into Shulchan Aruch. Why? Because this is not an Inyan which Yidden feels it. Talking about traveling, in other words, one parting from another, the Rebbe referred to a major travel, and that is the travel when Yidden went into Golus. Yidden went into Golus. They also traveled. They parted from the Rebbeinu Shalom, parted from the Beis Hamikdash, parted from Yerushalayim. However, here the Rebbe says there was a Dvar Halacha. What was the Dvar Halacha which was heard? Chazal tell us that when the Yidden went into Golus, there was a sound that came out from a parah. Cow made a sound, and immediately it was interpreted, what is the meaning of this sound? Twice the same sound, that Noilad Mashiach Shal Yisrael. In other words, the Rebbe speaks about this many occasions and keeps on stressing that at the moment when HaKadosh Baruch Hu sent Yidden into Golus, the Rebbe right away reminded us that this Golus is not something which is endless. The Rebbe right away reminded us that Noilad Mashiach Shal Yisrael, that there is an Inyan that Mashiach Shal Yisrael, the one who's going to take Yidden out of Golus and going to rescue them and bring us back from Golus into Geulah. B'negei the Rashi, Parshas Korach, times we know the Rebbe stellt sich an a Rashi. Today, the Rebbe raised the question which obviously something which requires an interpretation in this week's Seder. And Rashi does not comment on it. In this week's Seder we read all the details about Korach. Then came the suggestion from Hashem. The Rebbe said that all the Nesiim should present a matter. And Aaron as well. And we will see what will happen with the matos. Sticks. And the one stick who will be producing, will be growing, will have something growing on top of it, that shows the one who the Rebbe has chosen to be the leader. And this is what happened. Aaron's stick. Vayetze perech, vayotze tzitz, vayigmol shked. The Rebbe says if we look into Chumash, each time we find an inyan which had the participation of all of the Nesiim, the Torah tells us the names of all the Nesiim. This is right away at the beginning of Pashas Bamidbar. We find this later in Pashas Masei. We find it when the Yidden traveled, when Eretz Yisrael was divided. Each time we come across mentioning the names of the Nesiim, the Torah does not just say a general term, the Nesiim. The Torah refers to each and every Nasi of every Shevet by name. Here the Torah didn't do that. Why? Each and every Nasi Echad, Mata la Nasi Echad, Lebeis Aveisim, there was a total of Shnei Masa Matais, Mata Yaram B'Seich Mataisam, but the Torah does not get involved telling us all the details of the names of the participants, all the Shvatim who brought their Matais, who brought along their sticks for this test. Also, the Rebbe raised another question. The Shevet of Levi was really divided into two. There's the Leviim and the Kohanim. Aaron was the Nasi of the overall Shevet, and more in particular, he was the Nasi of the Leviim. Of the Kohanim. We read free in the Torah there was Bnei Kohos, Bnei Merari, Bnei Gershon. There were various families in Shevet Levi. However, who was Nasi HaLeviim? Elazar ben Ahar. The Rebbe raised the question, if so, when the participants of when Levi brought, why, being that Shevet Levi was divided into two families, they could have brought two sticks. One for the Kohanim of Shevet Levi and one for the Leviim of Shevet Levi. So Elazar, who really represented Nesiim, the leader of leaders of the Leviim of Shevet Levi, could have also brought a Mata, and Aaron should have brought a Mata for the Kohen. So this, the Rebbe explained, is here the Torah wants to show how HaKadosh Baruch Hu was selected in Aaron. In other words, the individuality, the dafke in Aaron more than in anyone else. So that is why it wasn't proper for anyone else from Shevet Levi to bring, because this is not the idea what the Torah wants to show. The Torah here wants to dafke show that Aaron was the one who was selected by HaKadosh Baruch Hu to be the Kohen Gadol, because they were arguing on the Kuna of Aaron. Why only Aaron's name is mentioned, and the names of the rest of the Shvatim are not mentioned? As the Rebbe says, is something which, if we look back to Chumash Bereishis, in Pashas Bereishis, we will find the answer. Right after Chet Eitzadas, the Torah tells us, "Vayisperu alei teina, vayasu lahem chaguros." When Adam and Chava realized ki erumim heim, they realized that they were naked. After Chet Eitzadas, alei teina, leaves of teina, of a fig tree, were used. They used to cover themselves. So Rashi comments, "Hua ate she'achlu mimenu." This is really the tree that they ate from. And bedava she'nischalkalu b'nisaknu. In other words, something which they sinned with, that is what helped them correct themselves at that time when they needed correction. So Rashi raises the question, why doesn't the Torah Taka tell us that it was a fig tree? Because the Torah does not want to embarrass anybody. Shelo yachlimu, it shouldn't become popular. People should always point to a fig tree and say, Zeh shaloka ha'olam al yadei. This is something which has brought ruin to the world. So what do we see right away in Chumash Bereishis? Right away in Chumash Bereishis, we see that the Torah introduces this concept. The Torah will never embarrass anyone. Here the Torah should have to go ahead and tell us all the names of the Nesiim who participated in bringing their sticks. However, HaKadosh Baruch Hu did not select their stick. Whose stick did HaKadosh Baruch Hu select? Aaron's stick. So that is why here the Torah did not mention the names. There is no need for the Torah here to mention the names of all of the Nesiim. Why? Because here, by telling us who they were, it does not bring honor to them. Their stick was not the one that was selected. So that is why here the Torah just says a general term that each one of the Nesiim brought their mata, brought their stick. However, in all other inyanim where the Torah discusses the greatness inyanim which the Nesiim participated in, and it's inyanim which do not bring them any shame. On the contrary, then the Torah definitely mentions all of them by name. Benegei Lekutei Levi Yitzchak, in this week's Sedra, Rebbe learned a commentary of his father on the Zohar, where the Zohar stresses that the inyan of Chet Korach, the sin of Korach, was something which is involved with, as the Zohar uses the expression, Lishna Bisha. Lishna Bisha in Aramaic is the same what we know in Hebrew, what we refer to as Lashon Hara. And the Zohar gets involved discussing the crime of Lashon Hara. And the Rebbe raised the question, why is it taka that Lashon Hara is something so harmful? And it's explained in Zohar that Lashon Hara, the sin of Lashon Hara, the source of it, goes back all the way to the Nachash HaKadmoni, to the original source of sin. So we see that Lashon Hara is a tremendous crime, a very hard crime. Explained, the difference between Lashon Hara and any other Aveira is, when a person does any Aveira, he has some sort of a satisfaction, or some sort of gain. If one worked on Shabbos, Chas v'Shalom, he feels he gained something. One ate treifa, something non-kosher, he feels he ate something, he enjoyed it. In Lashon Hara, there's something which literally there is no enjoyment in it. It brings no results. Just to talk bad about somebody else, it's the talking bad and nothing else together with it. There's nothing positive which is in Lashon Hara. And that is why Lashon Hara is condemned so. And Lishne Bishas, as the Zohar uses the expression, and says that it goes back to Nachash HaKadmoni, to the original source of sin, because this is an Aveira that really has nothing to it. It's something which really doesn't bring any enjoyment, any satisfaction, just talking bad on somebody else. And this is why Chazal, to such an extent, tell us how bad and how wrong the Chet of Lashon Hara is. A gute Woche.